studied of the traditional rabbinic works, even though we don't necessarily follow everything in it. Just for example, it talks about not drinking, it talks about burning your fingernails, which some communities still do. It talks about not drinking wine in multiples of two, other than Passover. If we drink four, right? Um,
Yeah.
like random things like that. So we don't follow everything in it, but a lot of Jewish law today, even today, it comes from this text. And here we have all types of stories. Um,
Like the story about the if you're a righteous man, you would have a big house near God.
mhm.
Um, I mean, that just is what people somebody came up with it, but it's
Yeah,
just a thought that's not anything to be proven.
no, it's nothing to be proven. No, but I think that I, what I'm trying to say is that sometimes it's not about proving. Like it doesn't matter whether it actually happens, right? It's the question of why do people come up with this, and what does it like? If you're at a shiva house, and somebody really, and let's say somebody believes this literally, or I think we can think of even other types of stories. Well, I'm sure that your father is up there in heaven smiling right now with the angels, as a way of saying, as opposed to down there in hell with the demons, or with the devils, this idea that we can still talk about and remember the people who we've lost, and even think about the ways in which they're getting what they deserve, both good or bad, and that's important to how we mourn, and that's important to how people process what it means to have lost somebody, especially if in a tragic way, or somebody you think really didn't deserve it. One way that people process it is to say, well, to push off the results in the afterlife. Can I prove it? Definitely not. Um, does it work for everybody? Definitely not. But it does work for some people, and it will probably work for some of the people that in your life that you're going to end up consoling as just a member of the community or a member of the family. Anything else about these stories?
They sort of feel like that gossip column feature, celebrities, they're just like us. It sort of feels like the dead, they're just like
Yes.
us.
Yeah. Well, right. And that's how each of the stories has that element of it. The whole "you're going to come join us," soon enough, and you're treating us like this now. If you go on to the stories, that I actually think in the Talmudic context, the point of bringing these stories in, if you look at the way in which the discussion continues, even beyond talking about death, is about be careful about how you treat your colleagues. These are rabbis writing for other rabbis. They're not writing for the right. And when I say rabbis, also they're not writing for pulpit rabbis. They're writing for the rabbis in the yeshiva. They're writing for judges, really. Um, and what they eventually come to is if you disrespect other rabbis, even the deceased other rabbis, once you go to the afterlife, you're going to have to deal with that. There's a story of one rabbi sitting outside of the heavenly yeshiva, and the visiting rabbi, the one who's from the land of the living, says, "Why aren't you going in?" He said, "Well, for all the time I didn't go to Rabbi so and so's yeshiva, they say I'm not allowed into the heavenly yeshiva." So he wasn't there for a couple of years. He can't go in for a couple of years. Um, there's the final story on this is Moses is told is told about the that God has fulfilled the promise to the patriarchs. And they say, well, why is he telling Moses this? And he says Moses should say, God has fulfilled the promise of the patriarchs. Problem is Moses is on Har Navo, Mount Navo, where he dies. He doesn't speak to anyone else again. So the Talmud asks, why does the text say he should tell people that he fulfilled the promises of the patriarchs? Oh, he has to go tell the patriarchs, right? He's going to go to them. So that's the only people left. He's going to say, oh, by the way, the promise you were waiting for, God fulfilled it. Talmud's question on that: you mean the patriarchs don't already know? They say their response: they do know. So why did God do it? Oh, because God wanted Moses to get in good with them. he wanted to set him up to have so that they'd accept him as one of their that they accept him. So he gave him good so he gave him something nice to say. He gave him good advice. Um, and I think that became the reason these stories are here in the Talmud became a way of talking about internal rabbinic politics. Make sure you treat both your colleagues as well as their teachers who've passed on. Don't speak badly about them, because if you do, when you go on to the afterlife, where you're going to have to deal with. Right now, you don't have to deal with the fallout, but in the afterlife, you will. All right. We have just a couple minutes left, so I don't think we need to do much more. I just is there any questions, anything to add on to this? All right. Well, if not, Larry, do you have anything?
Well, I was just wondering, is some of the things that people say, especially around the mourners, are there things that are said just to give them some, whether they're true or not, just to give them some relief?
Right. Well, just so first, we're definitely going to talk more about that in one of the other classes, but in terms of what to do when you are with mourners. But one of the things that, when we say like El Malei Rachamim, for example, as a prayer, that definitely talks about the afterlife in it. And that's certainly something that people will do as part of mourning ritual. So there are times where people say things, whether or not, whether it's metaphorical or not. There is at least some versions of El Malei. There is also, you say Hamako Minachem Etchem, like, may God, console you, although that doesn't actually talk about the afterlife. My general advice based off of tradition is you're quiet. The custom is you're quiet. You don't start conversations, and you don't talk about topics that the mourners don't want to talk about, and that you really respond to them. I think you just go with what, if somebody says that they talk to their father through a medium, unless you think they're being like tricked, that's a different, way. Like if it's, but so then just go with it, because that's not the time to have those conversations.
Sure.
Right. And see, and don't let that, I think the thing that I'm really trying to get at is don't let the fact that you believe one way and the other person believes a different way get in the way of your ability to experience the emotion, to reflect the emotions that they're experiencing. And if for you, the way to interpret something either that's too rationalist or too superstitious, wherever you stand, to really give your sense the ability to, I'm going to translate it. Like, right, I may not believe it, but I'm going to translate it into, if I did believe it, then I see why they would feel this way. Or to find ways to connect. That's, I think, really the advice I would give.
Mm-hmm.
Any
So I guess one thing that I noticed sort of by its absence in the stories that you were talking about was transfiguration, the idea that, after death, we're somehow materially, spiritually different, that we have some sort of a veil of ignorance stripped from us. We participate in the mind of God, et cetera, et cetera. And that doesn't seem to be present, or is it just elsewhere?
Well, it's definitely elsewhere, but it doesn't mean that it's here too. There's always the question of do we read Jewish texts together, like they all have to agree with each other, or can we say that there are debates between sources? And I think that sometimes yes, sometimes no. In this case, I'm not. It doesn't seem to have that element that like you can be deceased and the way you're buried can keep you from having that access. You have some extra access. Clearly, you can go to God to God's court and listen behind the curtain and hear the discussions. So you have some access to greater knowledge, whether it's metaphoric or literal. But there's also enough physicality involved that you can be kept from participating in that. So I think the rabbis, one of the nice things about the way these stories are written, why I love folk tales so much and myths is you don't have to take the whole thing literally to understand that there's something deep being discussed. Well, we only have a couple more minutes. So if you don't mind, I'm going to just give you a preview of the next two courses. And I'd love to see you come back. Welcome to come back. Or if there are other people you think would find it interesting, please let them know. The next course is going to be about saying mourner's Kaddish, because it's one of the prayers that even Jews who otherwise do almost nothing else. There are still many people you have to say Kaddish, and the fact that even in Reform synagogues we'll say it in Aramaic, as opposed to English, especially since the fact it was originally written in Aramaic meant it was originally written in the language people actually spoke. It wasn't written in Hebrew. It was basically if it were written today, it would have been written in English. So I think it's very interesting just to look at that prayer. And I'm going to compare it to Hail to the Chief, which actually does have words, and some other and to give some other insights into how we can connect to it as a prayer, and why I think it became a prayer, the standard prayer of mourning. The third class we're going to look more at what to do in a Shiva house, and what are the rules, and try and discuss them in terms of why do those rules exist, and what are the boundaries? How flexible can we be, and are there things that we can do in some cases and shouldn't do in others, and just to have a broader conversation, which will hopefully lead us into even discussions about our synagogue and where we want to go. So thank you so much. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed it. And
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
Yeah.
you. All right. Good
Bye-bye.
night.
see you
Good
next
Bye-bye.
night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye, Sid.